Hey, hello and welcome back to Tintincast. We said we'd be back and we are. Good to see you, Miles.
Good to see you, my friend. We threatened we'd be back and we're men of our threats.
And we've had some lovely feedback on the channel. It's just been made it all worth it.
It has, hasn't it? It's been genuinely surprising. It's been really nice just to, first of all, find out how many Tintin fans there are in the world. Because we knew it's a popular thing, but just it's really nice that people want to listen to us jabber on. And just people who said they were genuinely interested in what we had to say, it just sort of makes it worthwhile, doesn't it? Because we rabbit on according to our own interests and friendship and stuff, but it's really nice that other people are enjoying it. I guess that's the point of a vlog, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of got me into podcasts, actually. I hadn't really listened to podcasts before we started doing this, and now I've kind of gone out and I've been listening to a lot, and I kind of understand the appeal of just listening to kind of two old friends chat to each other, because there's just, so many different. I've been listening to a Golden Girls podcast, and there's these three guys who kind of were at school together in the 80s, 90s in the States, and they go through each episode of the Golden Girls, and that's kind of entertaining. I mean, they're just going to ramble on, but it's nice.
Yeah. Well, especially if you love the show they're talking about, because I enjoy a few podcasts. Most of them are film related, but and then I enjoy a few YouTubers like Red Letter Media. They're a bunch of friends and they just gather and either talk about how much they love a movie or how much they think a movie was ridiculous. But lots of the stuff they do is old movies from years ago, and obscure movies and random movies and stuff. But it is funny listening to them talk about, because you'd think it would be quite niche and esoteric because you haven't seen most of these films they're talking about. It's the way they talk about them. Thankfully, people can access Tintin quite easily. So yeah, I'm glad that people are clicking on this because they're fans of Tintin, and hopefully this show, which is great.
It is. So why are we back? Surely we've done all of the Tintin books.
Or have we?
Well, tonight we're going to find out what connects Tintin and the Lake of Sharks with James Bond, Jacques Brel, and the film Deliverance.
Oh, that sounds really scary. Kill a bit with Ned Beatty, which I won't, go into.
Yes, that's right. And it's kind of appropriate that we're doing this book, actually, because when we last saw each other a few weeks ago, we played Book Jaws, the board game.
We did, which is fantastic.
More shark-related entertainment.
That's true. Actually, we said at the time we should do Lake of Sharks soon, shouldn't we? Yeah, the Jaws board game. Wow, that's really good fun. You play on Amity Island as the three. You can either play the shark, which Marcus did, or the three crew member of the orca, and then you turn the board over once that round is over, and the boat gets destroyed gradually by the shark, and you have to try and kill it. It's just a lot of fun. So recommend that.
It's a lovely game.
Yeah.
Well, shall I do a bit of the context for tonight's episode?
Please do.
Tintin and the Lake of Sharks is a 1972 French-Belgian animated film based on the adventures of Tintin. But this adventure wasn't written by Hergé, although he did play a supervisory role on the project. Instead, it was written by Belgian cartoonist Michel Renier under his pseudonym Greg. So by 1972, when Lake of Sharks was made, Tintin had already featured in a number of films. Way back in 1947, an hour-long black and white stop-motion 3D animation of Crab with Golden Claws was produced. And although it only screened once, I believe, during the 40s, due to the producers going bust during filming, it is still available on YouTube, so that's a good one to watch. It does look particularly lo-fi. There are also some partial animations of King Ottokar's Scepter and The Broken Ear made in 1956. But then at the start of the 60s, there were these two live action films made under license by the French Pathé Company. So that was Tintin and the Golden Fleece in 1961 and Tintin and the Blue Oranges in 1964, although Hergé seems to have had little involvement with either of those, and he didn't particularly like the results either. Jean-Pierre Talbot, who was cast as Tintin in those films, actually had no acting experience. He was a Belgian sports instructor with a passing resemblance to Tintin, which is what won him the role. Then in the mid-50s, Raymond LeBlanc, the editor of Tintin magazine, launches Belvision Studios to cash in on Tintin's success by starting to adapt the Tintin adventures into these short 5 minutes installments. Hergé's Adventures of Tintin.
I remember that.
Belvision also produced the first full-length animated Tintin movie in 1962, The Calculus Case, which was based on the Calculus Affair. And that actually was used as shorts as well as part of their serializations. But Hergé had never been particularly fond of any of these adaptations, and most of them were quite low budget things, and particularly the Belvision 5-minute cartoons famously saved money by sort of rehashing the previous week's episode for the first half of the next episode in subsequent installments. So this was very much opposed to Hergé's very meticulous and high-end approach to producing the cartoon books. But Hergé had always liked the idea of bringing Tintin to the big screen, and he'd once approached Walt Disney to talk about taking on the franchise. So Hergé approaches this cartoonist, Michel Renier, aka Greg, to ask him to adapt Tintin for the big screen. And at this time, Greg was the editor-in-chief of Tintin magazine. This was between 66 and 74. He was the editor-in-chief. And during this time at Hergé magazine, Greg seems to have moved away from the classics of Lynn Clare technique of Hergé, introduced more adult themes into the magazine, more violence. And in particular, this seems to have been to compete with the success of a new French magazine, Pilote, which was showcasing the Asterisk series. Did I get that right?
Asterix. Yeah.
Asterix. Bugger.
Although a lot of people, as we discussed in the previous episode, say, oh, look, there's an asterisk there. And I'm like, you mean an asterisk, but never mind.
So the Asterisk films.
Outtake.
Yeah.
Asterix.
Anyway, those films had been a great success, and Tintin was finding it hard to compete with either on paper or on the big screen. So first, Greg rewrites the Tintin adventure, The Seven Crystal Balls and Prisoners of the Sun, into one long animated movie called Tintin and the Temple of the Sun, and that's released by Belvision in 1969. And following this, Greg has the winds in his sails, and he decides to write his own script for a new Tintin big screen adventure, Tintin and the Lake of Sharks, which we're covering today. It was supervised by Hergé, although realistically he was given very limited artistic control by Raymond LeBlanc, who was heading up Belvision. And mainly the work fell to Hergé's right-hand man, Bob Damore, who actually spent 5 or 6 years around this time painting the backdrops to these big screen adventures. So Tintin and the Lake of Sharks was released by Belvision in 1972 and was subsequently made into a cartoon book and first published in English by Methuen in 1973. And the comic book uses the still images from the film as illustrations. And chronologically for Hergé, this film comes in the long hiatus between Flight 714 and Tintin and the Picaros. And in this period of time, he was pretty much disengaging from Tintin magazine and the Tintin adventures. So my first question, Miles, is this canon?
I mean, do you know what? I remember, and this is amazing, you know, my selective memory is very, very spooky sometimes. I remember at school, when we were at school together, I said, well, what's this last one then, Tintin and the Lake of Sharks? And you said, oh, it's not really a Tintin book, it's a film they've turned into a book. And I always remembered that. That's remembering about 36 years ago or so. Anyway, and I presume what they did is because of the way it's slightly different from the animated film in terms of the way it's laid out and stuff, they picked the best bits and they picked the cell animation of the characters and sort of rejigged them onto the background just to make it look like it could have been one of Hergé's books. So it's funny, although it does, it does bear the the hallmarks of Hergé, I guess, because he supervised it. So it does feel like a Hergé story. It's clearly a rehash of the last couple of books because it's got all the same stuff in it. And if Hergé had put this book out as a story after Tintin and Alf Art, which is the last one we covered, people would have said, "Wow, you're really treading water." Because it's got all the same elements, oh, look, there's Rastapopoulos. Oh, look, there's Castafiore. Oh, look, there's Cuthbert Calculus has just turned up.
There's an underwater shark submarine.
There's an underwater shark submarine. There's lots of, I'm not saying it's not fun. It's very fun. It's very simplified. It's kind of simplified Tintin, really, because Tintin, I think you as well, which is the point you were making when you first got this book, is we both prefer the Lean Claire backgrounds and we both prefer Hergé's backgrounds. They're just exquisite. You could almost take the characters out of every single frame of Hergé and it'd be just work of art. Whereas this uses obviously some of those paintings that were done not by Hergé and puts Tintin in front of them, and it doesn't look that bad. It looks a bit odd because the backgrounds are quite blurry and filmic and the cell characters are quite clear. So I guess the answer is it's not really canon. It's kind of a side adventure done by someone who likes Hergé and has asked permission to do it. And it's never felt to me like one of the 24 books. Should know this by now, shouldn't I? It always felt to me like a side adventure by a fan who wanted to direct the film, because he just takes bits from each book and plonks them all together.
Yeah.
So there's nothing that surprising in it. It's got some of the gags in it. It's got plane crashes in it that seem to be from another Tintin book. It's got bad guys from other Tintin books. It's got similar jokes to other Tintin books. So yeah, I think it's a bit of a artistic license story.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, the things that don't make it canon for me are the fact that on the back you don't get all the other Tintin books. You get this kind of weird list of Tintin adventures, I think up to that point, in a weird order. So not kind of in the order that you expect them to be in. And also that the book isn't the sort of standard 62 pages of the other adventures. It sort of stops on page 44. And it's weird because the film actually has a lot more content in there, and they could have easily made a 62-page adventure from it. But actually, they have a lot of these frames within the cartoon that actually just have like text in them which describes the action, which is really weird because presumably they had all the frames to show the action kind of quite clearly, and that's what Hergé did so brilliantly. He was such a good visual storyteller. He could just fill frames without any dialogue and really move the story along. And actually here you could have had 5 frames describing a bit of action, but no, you just have like this block of text in the middle. It just doesn't feel as though much love is given to the book.
That's it. I mean, 20 pages are missing from it that could have easily been in there. Like, it's like they sort of dive under the water and then it goes, and then Snowy finds a rusted metal chain. It's like, yeah, I can see that in the picture. Maybe you should have shown him finding the rusted metal chain and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, it describes stuff that you're either already looking at, or you could have done with an extra. Yeah, you could have fit another 18 pages in there. It would have been 62 pages. And I think if Hergé had been super into it, he might have supervised it to the point where he said, well, can we at least, because it's obviously making some attempt to match the classic books. So why do it if you're not going to do it properly?
Yeah, and you sort of have in this book, you have sort of the 3 rows of cartoons rather than kind of the standard 4 that you would usually get in a Hergé book.
Yeah.
And also I mean, I think some of the backdrops are painted very beautifully by Bob Damore, but actually in the book, certainly in my copy of the book, it's kind of very faded and faint, these kind of watercolors in the background, and it makes it look, as you were saying, just very un-Hergé, like the crispness isn't there, although the frames are painted very beautifully. They're just not very reproduced very well in the book.
No, it's a bit muddy, isn't it? It's like really bad back projection that hasn't been graded, and it's like an old print of a movie that you're watching where you're like, I'm sure this used to look good.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the effect they were going for. They thought we'll do a sort of like a wash with the characters on top, but it just makes it look like they've stuck some of the characters onto these backgrounds, like you get with those sticker sets where you can stick a character, add them onto scenes. And like in terms of ingredients, there's a lot in there that's good as in terms of tint. It's got Thompson's being, clumsy. It's got Haddock, although Haddock in the movie, the animated version, sounds like Papa Lazarou from League of Gentlemen.
I thought that he sounded like Captain Beefheart, actually.
Gives me the willies looking at it by blistering barnacles.
A squid eating dough in a polyethylene bag is fast and bulbous. Got me?
Really like Captain Beefheart. There's a really interesting thing about the guy who voiced Captain Haddock. His name was Claude Bertrand. And he actually dubbed Roger Moore into French in all the James Bond series between 1973 and 1985. It's like blistering barnacles, Moneypenny, and 10,000 thundering typhoons.
Oh my God, that's crazy.
It's weird, isn't it?
Yeah, that's weird. So he was the voice of Roger Moore in France.
Yeah.
I love that. Actually, it's funny that because I can't remember who it was. It was someone like Eddie Izzard did a skit about that once where he said, he went to do his stand-up in France or Spain. I think it was Spain. And he did a Sean Connery impression, and he was doing it and no one was laughing. And he was like, oh, is this just really unfunny? And it's like someone in Spain just went, no, we don't know what Sean Connery sounds like because all the films are dubbed over here. So you might as well be doing any old voice because Spanish Sean Connery sounds nothing like you're doing. And we've never heard him speak, and it's weird, isn't it? But yeah, no, he sort of sounds like he doesn't say much in this, Haddock, and he's sort of apart from swearing, but he's a grumpy old alcoholic who just keeps wanting a drink, which is the old Haddock. Obviously, by the time we get to Tintin and the Picaros, he's off the booze. In fact, he's off the booze. Calculus puts him off booze with that thing, doesn't he? And then he won't drink booze again.
Yeah, that's right.
So he's back to being an alcoholic, which is kind of weird, but like when they come to do the Spielberg movie in 10, that's kind of acceptable because it's like, well, here is a big version of Tintin that you haven't seen before. You have to meet Haddock. He has to be an alcoholic. It's part of the character. Whereas in Lake of Sharks, it just feels like in book form, more so. Oh, okay. We've kind of come this far with him and now you've reset him by about 5 years. Okay, fair enough. It's a bit jarring, especially since they put it in book form. I guess if you watched the Lake of Sharks animation and all the animated versions of the books, you wouldn't notice because you'd be like, oh, it's another adventure. It's the fact that they've kind of shoehorned it into a book format. It was quite nice. It's quite a nice artifact to have, but it doesn't really, and it's never really felt to me like a proper Tintin book. Do you know what I mean?
No, absolutely. I mean, all of the, as you were saying, the different ingredients that Greg sort of throws into this, and apparently Hanna-Barbera kind of came over and supervised it. It's got that kind of feel about it, the animation, and it's kind of the kind of watercolor washes backgrounds as well. But also it introduces these really annoying children as well, who I have no time for at all. What is it, Nina and Nushka or something?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And they kind of come into the story with this kind of really kind of horrendous, almost kind of Walt Disney-esque, but it ends up being a bit more like the Wicker Man, this kind of I Love My Doggy song.
Yeah.
Which kind of, they sing this song and then it kind of means nothing because kind of the dog really doesn't feature in it after this. Although they just sung I Love My Doggy in this really annoying, out of tune way. And then that's like, the dog's not really kind of seen much.
No, it's so odd, isn't it? They're almost non-characters. It's really just an excuse to have them, get kidnapped. And the best thing about this story is the replicator, because that's a good element that Calculus invents, the replicator, which can duplicate real things that then turn into mush. And that's quite good, that's what Rastapopoulos wants. He wants to, and again, it feels like a. I think did this come out after Alpha Art or before?
This would have been before Alpha Art.
Before it was published, but was he working on it then? Because it's the whole art forgery thing.
Well, there's a few things because there's the art forgery, but there's also this thing about the replicator kind of goes wrong and it kind of creates this kind of expansionist kind of mush. And
Yes.
that almost is repeated in Alpha Art later. So I'm wondering if actually Hergé did draw some inspiration from this book for Alpha Art.
That's it. I wonder which influenced which. Because there are elements of, like I say, there are elements of the last 4 or 5 books in Lake of Sharks. There's a couple actually in the film. There's that really tense moment where Tintin's crawling underwater and he gets trapped behind the metal.
Yeah, that's quite scary. It reminds me actually of that really upsetting scene in the Paddington movie where he gets trapped in the train carriage underwater and like you think he's gonna die.
He's gonna die. Paddington's going to die. Yeah, that and the second one as well. There's a couple of that's the second one, isn't it? Whereas the first one, you think he's going to fall down the chimney, and he like goes, and you have that moment where you're like, no way are they going to kill off Paddington? My God! But it's just that upsettingness that element of, oh my God, it might happen. But yeah, it did feel like, and then Snowy rescues him, which is great. So, what influenced what? Was it Alpha Art influenced this, or did this influence that? Was he working on elements of Alpha Art when this film was developed? Because there's the art forgeries, the replicator. It's all stuff that it's too much of a coincidence to be a coincidence.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like the idea of the calculus's invention, and it's always good to see calculus in one of these adventures. But then the whole convoluted nature of Rastapopoulos wanting this replicator so he can somehow replicate these precious objects that he's been stealing from galleries and things, although he's already seems to have been able to create replicas of these things, which for fooling people that he's putting in there instead of the real objects. But then he wants to be able to replicate these precious, I don't quite understand any of it, but I don't particularly understand that if he was wanting to steal this thing from Professor Calculus, why he can't just rent a villa down the road from Professor Calculus. He has to build this underwater lair.
Yeah. It's a bit flimsy, isn't it? I don't think it's got the careful plotting of, and even like Hergé in his last few episodes, adventures was kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel. We did, I think it was, which one? It was Prisoners of the Sun, maybe, which is a good one, but we were starting to realize he was just rehashing old ideas and having, there's Rastapopoulos again, and Castafiori's popped up again. And I think Lake of Sharks just sort of takes that to the nth degree, where it's like, right, what should we have in Tintin? But it's almost like it was the director's excuse to go, I want to have all these characters in it. And to be honest, Spielberg...
I've watched James Bond and I want my underwater lair and sharks with frickin' laser beams
attached to their heads. And also, again, it's got the plane crash, which I haven't mentioned the obvious Indiana Jones yet, but there we go. You've got a bet on it. The plane crash at the beginning where the pilot bails out and they're left and Tintin's left trying to hold and it crashes into a mountain. They nicked that for Temple of Doom. So whether that's in another Tintin book or
who is that pilot and why is he suddenly jumping out of a plane? That kind of didn't make any sense either.
Not really. It doesn't that's the thing, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, whereas Hergé was very meticulous.
Yeah.
And sometimes quite political, and he had a point, Hergé, which was, it was usually slightly political or it's to do with a country, a real life country, and he sort of fictionalized it. Whereas this just has bad guys in it, heavies, henchmen, thugs, who want to steal things. But it doesn't make a lot of sense. Why are you stealing all this original art to copy it? What are you going to do? Put the copies back and then sell the? I don't understand. I think Rastapopoulos by this point has gone insane.
It's a weird thing, and the whole idea of this kind of flooded village at the bottom of the lake. Actually, this is really interesting because there was another movie in 1972 which features a flooded village at the bottom of a lake, and it is.
That is it You Only Live Twice?
No.
I'm thinking of
Well, it could be.
No, that was the 60s, and I'm thinking of the volcano with the bad guys layering it. No, why? What are we talking about?
So actually in 1972, not only was Lake of Sharks released, but Deliverance was released. And the idea is at the end of that film, that the reason that the guys are canoeing up the Kahulawasi or something, is because they're about to flood that whole river valley and the villages that were there. It was actually the Duke Power Company in the Jocassee Valley, apparently in 1972 in South Carolina. And at the end of the film, they're sort of flooding this valley, and everything goes beneath this village goes beneath the water. And same year as Lake of Sharks.
I'd completely forgotten that about Deliverance. Deliverance is one of those films that I've watched a few times, and I did enjoy it, but I keep getting it confused with Southern Comfort, which is another good film, and it's about a bunch of lads, who get set upon by Cajuns. And so it's similar. There's the locals like overwhelm them and do nasty things to them.
Oh right, yes.
So
I have to stress that that's the point at which any similarities between Deliverance and the Lake of Sharks ends.
And thank God, because if they discovered the lad with the banjo and the lad who says Ned Beatty has got a pretty mouth, we'd be in a lot of trouble, wouldn't we? You got a pretty mouth. But yeah, it's an interesting book. It's almost like, well, let's have another Tintin book, but you read it and it leaves you slightly dissatisfied because I don't think it's anyone's favorite Tintin book. It's not a book. It's a book form presentation of an animated movie, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's one of the best things about it is that the backdrops look good. It is quite. There's quite a lot of action in it, although the action often kind of peters out and goes nowhere. But the music, it has a suitably 70s score, doesn't it?
It really does. It's so dated. It's brilliant.
The guy who did the music, apparently, is Francois Rabert, and he was best known for being musical director for Jacques Brel, the Belgian singer. So there's kind of some of that kind of overblown kind of 70s stereophonic stuff in there. It's pretty good.
I did like the score, but my initial thought was this is like, The Beast Must Die, or even anything from the 70s, even The Spy Who Loved Me, which has got the most 70s score ever. Bow, 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 boom, boom, boom. Like this is a Bond film, okay. Although I actually quite like Marvin Hamlish's score for The Spy Who Loved Me. But the 70s went for it with the disco and the sort of big Scooby-Doo sort of scores, didn't they? So it's, again, I would say the film's better than the book because the film is what it is. The book is really just a cash-in, I guess. Film,
I agree. The film is the superior of the formats here.
It's quite nice, the film, and I think the film sort of fits in with the animated Tintin adventures. So you've got that whole box set of all the Tintin adventures, which most of which are taken from the books. But so it fits in nicely, and they're quite nice, the Tintin cartoons. I don't put them on a lot. I think, I don't know why. I've always just been a bit of a purist, I guess, which I know is boring because I generally like all versions of, if I like something, I'll tend to read around it and find the different versions. And obviously, as you know, I love movies and cartoons and stuff. But I think the books are just so perfect that whenever I watch a Tintin cartoon, I'm like, yeah, it's not as good as the book. I'm one of those people.
There is this friction between the published work of Hergé and these films, because Hergé always was dissatisfied with the films, and this and all of the Belvision series seems to have been very much Raymond LeBlanc during his time as Tintin magazine's editor, trying to turn the Hergé studios into some kind of like European Disney. And Hergé didn't like the way that, they were quite cheap production, the way you'd use the same background over and over again. It was that kind of animation. And you kind of wonder why someone who was so controlling as Hergé would let, repeatedly them exploit his cartoons, his great hero Tintin, and make these sort of substandard products in the motion pictures that they made. But I mean, maybe it's to do with, LeBlanc sort of saved Hergé's career after World War II, when there was all that kind of stuff about him being a kind of collaborator, or at least a sympathizer, or he didn't sort of stand up to the Nazis. And LeBlanc did him a lot of favors, kind of rehabilitating him and getting him back on track. So you sort of wonder whether this is why Hergé let him do this stuff with the animated cartoons.
He probably just went, oh, you know what? These guys are going to just do some nice Tintin cartoons, and they'll shoot me the odd check, and I'll be able to sort of see what they're doing and approve it and all that, or whatever. However they work together, and I don't blame Hergé at all.
I mean, apparently Hergé, he wasn't particularly happy with the way things were going, but he sort of let them get on with it. And apparently LeBlanc said the intransigence of Hergé, who judged Greg's approach to be incompatible with his own conceptions, was certainly decisive in his disengagement. Hergé ceased to battle and little by little detached himself from the magazine. So yeah, it just seemed by this time he'd sort of given up fighting for his vision.
Yeah. By that point, I think he probably wanted to just have a nice life.
Yeah.
What was left of it. And
he's remarried, and he was doing less. So he'd sort of been experimenting with his own fine artwork as well.
Yeah, that's true. And obviously that comes into Alpha Art, the whole obsession with art, and that's one Tintin book that I would recommend highly, which is the last one we reviewed. Tintin and Alpha Art, because it's one I read it on the day we reviewed it. I'd never read it before, didn't own it till recently, and I thought it was terrific, because if you can go into the detail with that episode, if you go back one episode, but it's got so much of Hergé in it. It's so much of the creative process and stuff, but it's not really I guess it's not a canon book because it's not finished, and he didn't finish it. He didn't want to finish it, or he didn't manage to finish it, but it's kind of essential, Tintin and Alpha Art. I think it's one of those books like you've got to read it if you're a Tintin fan. Whereas this one, I would say you don't have to read it, just watch the film, which is not something I'd usually say. And the Tintin cartoons, I should say, got a lot of fans. A lot of people I know love the cartoons and haven't really read all the books, and that's fine. If you grew up with the cartoons, you love the cartoons, great. It's perfectly valid. But personally, I will always go with the. I think if a Tintin cartoon is on, I will watch it, because they were fun, and it's a good way of revisiting the stories, isn't it? But this one it's quite unique as a movie because it's its own thing. It's not anything to do with the books. It's not from a book, so you don't. If you're watching the film for the first time, you haven't read the book, you don't know what's going to happen. Rather than if you're watching the Black Island cartoon, you know what's going to happen because you've read the book.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, there's plenty of callbacks to, whether it's the Sildavia-Borduria feuds going on, or Castafiori's there. She kind of comes in and sings along with a Sildavian folk tune in the adventure. And so there's lots of, you're kind of in familiar territory, but the humor isn't as sophisticated as Hergé. The action kind of peters out.
In his last few books, Haddock got to grow up and change as a character, which was brilliant to see. And so that's why it's a little bit hard to read this one and go, oh, he's just an old drunk again, because there was a real, cartoon characters don't really evolve, whereas Tintin, he had a bit more of a passive role as he got older, whereas Haddock matured and settled down. And it was great to see him settle down in his home and renovate it and be happy there, and avoid Bianca Castafiore for the rest of his life. But so
there's a sort of narrative arc that this sits outside of, although I mean, Rastapopoulos, his underwater lair, you could say, at the end of Red Sea Sharks, he escapes in this sort of little miniature submarine, so maybe that was the idea, that he kind of somehow found his way to this underwater.
And I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with the second Peter Jackson Spielberg movie, because it's been in development hell for like over a decade. But if they did make it, this is the kind of book they could read and go, you know what, there's a few good ideas in here. Maybe we should get some elements of this and incorporate it into, I don't know which books they're going to do next, actually. But
no children or Sildavian folk songs, please.
No children. But what they could do for the second movie is they could get Calculus Affair and Seven Crystal Balls and stuff, and elements of this kind of thing where someone's been kidnapped. You know, you could have Calculus gets kidnapped by Rastapopoulos, and they have to go down in the sub again, and all. You know what I mean? There's various ways you could incorporate elements. There are some fun elements in it, but yeah, you can tell Hergé was kind of hands off with it.
So on the 7 crystal balls scale, what would you give Tintin and the Lake of Sharks?
I'm going to give the movie 4 and the book 3.
Snap!
Jolly good. Well, I think the movie, it's a fun 70 minutes or so, 74 minutes, I think. But it's a fun, if you can, and you can. You sent me a link, but I watched it. It's all on YouTube. So if you want to watch the movie of Tintin and the Lake of Sharks, just go onto YouTube. It's all there in a nice copy as well. The movie's fun. The book is really a souvenir of the movie, let's say.
Nice. No, I totally agree with you there. So we'll probably be back with some other spin-offs from Hergé's Adventures of Tintin.
Hergé's Adventures of Tintin. Yeah, there's a few bits of ephemera, isn't there, as they call them, which is left over from his legacy, which are interesting, very interesting, actually.
There's a bunch of random stuff that we might come back and explore. But
Yes.
It's been good to get back to this, and entertaining film and book. Well worth a watch.
Definitely worth it. And we never say at the end, please like and subscribe to our channel. We've got a lovely bunch of subscribers, but we never say please like and subscribe. So please like and subscribe. If you enjoyed this, go back and watch some of the ones you haven't watched. We cover every single Tintin book that Hergé wrote and illustrated, and we will continue to cover books like this, which are more around Tintin than by Hergé. So yeah, more to come.
Lovely stuff. We'll see you soon.
Bye.